That's right, I really broke the bank this time. Bought this off of Amazon. I guess that's pronounced Hohem or Hohem. iSteady Pro 4 splash-proof 3-axis action camera gimbal. There's actually a promo going on Amazon roughly a week ago where this thing was originally $99.99, but there was I think a $21 coupon. One thing I kind of regret doing is buying one that was specifically meant for action cameras, but I wanted to make sure that it was actually going to work. This one's compatible with GoPro 11 through 5. Wireless control, so you don't have to rely on the buttons of the actual GoPro once it's installed into the gimbal, and that's important, as I'll show in a few moments. Quick installation, it claims. IPX4 splash-proof rating, 14 hours battery, and a built-in power bank functionality. They do give you this nice hard clamshell case which zippers up to store the gimbal, the little mini tripod, and the charging cables, which mine currently is devoid of anything because I've been testing this off camera. So here's the mini tripod adapter, which folds up just like that GoPro hand grip. We have 3 variations of GoPro charging cable. Well, I shouldn't say GoPro, but action camera charging cables by way of mini USB, USB-C, and micro USB. So here's a look at the gimbal, and going off of the pictures that they have on the exterior of the box, this is how you're supposed to have it oriented and how you're supposed to install your GoPro, either by sliding it in this way or this way, depending on which action camera you're using. But that brings me to an interesting little dilemma that I've encountered when trying to connect my GoPro Hero 5 to the gimbal. The way they want you to do this is to use this quick release locking mechanism. Take your GoPro, if it stays open, I'm trying to do this so that the camera can actually see, and just kind of let it rest on that rubber, and then manipulate this so it goes around the lens, and then use that quick release tab mechanism to lock the GoPro in. And I'm assuming this is probably the orientation that they want you to use the GoPro in, so that way you can take advantage of the hidden USB port right here for supplying consistent and constant power to your GoPro by using one of these right angle cables that they include in the box. The gimbal itself will be supplying power to the GoPro, so you don't have to worry about dead batteries anymore. The only thing you have to worry about is trying to make sure that the your action camera is kind of straight, as otherwise you could just have it installed cattywampus like that, and the gimbal's not going to help with that at all. I have previously paired this to the GoPro, so if everything is working correctly, it should turn on. Yep, say USB connected. And now if we look at the screen, you can see that it is indicating that it's receiving power and charging the battery. The instructions were surprisingly devoid of, well, at least a quick start guide on what you have to do to initiate pairing with this thing. It says press and hold the power on. You press and hold the main power button on the gimbal, and then it says indicator keeps flashing green, and then it says just to go through all these setting screens in the GoPro. Well, that's not what I had to do. What I had to do, double click that Bluetooth button, which then initiates pairing. You could see by way of that green light flashing. Go down to connect new device, yeah, GoPro app, there we go. And in a few moments, it will be paired now with your GoPro. Now you can activate and deactivate video recording with your GoPro by pressing that record button. Of course, I won't be able to do that because there's not currently an SD card installed, but you'll have to take my word for it. So the left side of the gimbal has a tripod mounting screw, as does the bottom. Behind this flap is the USB-C charging port, and then a regular full-size USB-A jack for using this thing as a power bank. On the right side are 4 LEDs that indicate the status of the charge level, which you can access just by quickly tapping the record button. You can see we have a full battery here. Over on the front, there's a joystick up and down, left and right, and also a tilt slider here. A mode button. There's 4 different modes to choose from, and your power button, which also doubles as the record button. Spinning this around, you might have noticed that there's actually a trigger button over on the front, just referred to as, I believe, a sport button or a sport trigger. Although doing some more research online from other websites seems to indicate that it will kind of disengage and relax the amount of image stabilization that this provides, So that way, if you're moving and doing fast panning shots of, let's say, a fast moving subject, the gimbal is not going to be struggling to keep up, or then you stop and it keeps going and drifting. Another feature of that trigger button is to center and recalibrate. That's helpful if you've been playing around with the joystick controls, the tilt controls, and now you want to return it back to dead center, and you do that by double clicking it. And we've now more or less zeroed it out at what should be the correct position. Fortunately, they do give you a full-size manual, although there's only about 10 pages of this entire thing that's actually in English. In it is some explanation of the different modes, such as pan follow, pan tilt follow, all locked, and POV mode. Pan follow mode locks the tilt and roll axis. Camera is able to move to left or right smoothly. And okay, yep, so that's allowing the camera to move left and right, or you can of course just use the joystick control along with the tilt control. Then there's pan and tilt follow, which is it locks the roll axis. The camera is able to move to left and right and tilt up and down. So this will be able to pan down and pan up if that's what I'm trying to do. There is the locked setting, which will essentially lock this on whatever subject you had it pointing at. So no matter what I'm trying to do here, you could see it's locked on the carrying case and doesn't deviate from that path. And lastly is a setting that I'm probably going to be using the most with this thing, if I shall decide to keep it, and that is the POV mode, which it says that the tilt axis, roll axis, and pan axis all follow the movement of the gimbal. So this thing will essentially try to figure out what you're wanting to film just by the motion of the gimbal. If I tilt it down, the GoPro moves down. If I tilt it up, it moves up. It keeps moving up. And if I move it left and right, the same thing. It keeps up and pretty much always has in frame what I actually want. Unfortunately, there's a fatal flaw of using this gimbal with GoPro 5 and quite possibly even newer models. And that is the dreaded gimbal motor noise being picked up by the GoPro's internal microphones. And that leads to a very annoying and unusable audio recording filled with whirling and twirling sounds from the gimbal motors. There's some talk and speculation online that updating the firmware will resolve the issue somewhat, although as you can clearly see, my GoPro is currently running the newest firmware, and that has not fixed the issues with the microphones picking up the noise of the gimbal operating. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be suggesting right about now to take the GoPro and flip it around so the microphone's not pointing over here. Well, guess what? I already tried that. Doesn't make any difference because it's picking up the vibration of the motors through the housing and into the microphones. And if you do decide to go that route anyway, even though it's going to end up with the same results, well, then you forfeit the use of the USB charging connection to the GoPro, because this is now going to be over here and there's not going to be any clearance to install this cable. Quite regrettably, I think that's going to lead me down the path of continuing to use my dummy GoPro handle tripod thing and not use a fancy gimbal. I'm not going to be able to use it because, well, I'm not going to be able to use it if I want usable audio from my GoPro. However, I will provide some sample footage now so you can get a feel for how well the video actually is stabilized and turns out using this thing. Really is a shame that the audio just is not going to be usable. Okay, here's the first test recording. This is in the pan follow mode. You can see how I can move the gimbal left and right, and essentially tries to stay locked on what it is I was filming. Likewise, if I tilt it up or down, it stays locked on for all intents and purposes. Although I'm sure you can hear that noise of the gimbal. If you try to move it too much, the gimbal kind of just jerks around and loses the plot. But if you stay at a reasonable pace and you don't try to exceed its limitations, it does decently well. So that's on lock, and you can see it does a fairly decent job as well as I move this thing left and right, up and down. It stays pretty much more or less focused and centered on my gigantic Coleman water jug thermos. And the setting that I'll be using likely the most is the POV mode, which again just kind of approximates and assumes what you want to film based upon the relative position of the gimbal. So if I tilt it down, it'll likewise tilt the camera down. If I tilt it up, it will tilt it up as well. Likewise, if I move to the left, it'll move the gimbal to the left, move it to the right. Does the same thing, so that's likely to setting that if I were to keep this thing, I'd use it on the most. So here's a test now on the POV mode, again the setting and mode that I'll be using the most, because it can actually kind of realize what you're trying to do with it without you having to make a bunch of manual adjustments with the joystick or the tilt control. I have now flipped around the mounting of the GoPro so that the quick release lever is on the bottom instead of the top, thus now positioning the GoPro's microphone to the outside and away from the gimbal motor, so it'll be interesting to hear if it's any quieter. So I really don't know what to do at this point. I was really looking forward to using this gimbal with my GoPro to capture much more usable and steady video. But quite regrettably, the issue that really can't be entirely blamed on the gimbal, but more so on the GoPro. I've noticed that the GoPro Hero 5s have a real nasty issue of picking up handling noise very easily, which is the main reason that led me to buying this GoPro hand grip and using this with the hard shell case. I could try to put pieces of foam here, maybe even a piece of foam here, even though they actually already have one, but I doubt that will actually resolve the issue to with any great degree of success. I could of course use an external audio recorder and then dub it in post, but that kind of defeats the whole convenience aspect of using a GoPro in the first place.